Alright guys, so this is going to show you how to fill out the seasons diagrams, and I am going to try and teach you as I go through this. I'm trying to refresh our brain. I know you had the video lesson already, but I do want to refresh our brains and talk about why we have seasons and what that looks like for us. So the first thing I need to point out is there are two diagrams here, okay? And the reason there are two diagrams is because we've talked about this a lot in astronomy already, but is because of perspective. So imagine you are facing somebody and they tell you to raise your right hand. When you're looking at the person, you're facing them, you're raising your right hand, they're raising their right hand. It's going to be their right hand is going to be on your left side. Okay? So when we talk about perspective, looking at these things, imagine you're looking at it from a different side. Okay? So this sun right here, not sun. Whew, this Earth right here is back behind the sun, and the same thing as this diagram right here. Okay, so that is back behind the sun, and that is back behind the sun, and this one is in front of the sun from the way you're looking at it. Okay, so if you're standing right here and looking at this 3D diagram, if you're standing right here, it's going to be tilted to the right. But if somebody is standing back here and looking back towards it and you're facing each other, it's going to be tilted towards their left. Okay? So the reason there are two diagrams is because we're talking about perspective, and there's not always a correct way necessary to look at this. And I'm trying to teach you both ways to look at it because I'm not sure what you're going to see later on, and I want you to understand the entire concept so that when you do see this later on, you'll be prepared for it, okay? So I am going to go through both diagrams with you. I'm going to explain both of them. I'm going to show you how to fill in both of them. And again, the reason there's two is because of perspective. You can look at it from a different angle and see things differently, okay? All right, so again, really quickly, just to talk about perspective, that Earth is back behind the sun. This Earth is in front of the sun. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to put on this diagram is I'm going to put arrows to show the direction of Earth's orbit. And most of you should remember this. It's okay if you don't, but we talked about this. We talked about how most things in nature are going to be counterclockwise. So that means they are going against the clock. So I am going to go ahead and add, if I could draw neatly, I'm going to go ahead and add the arrows for the direction of Earth's orbit around the sun. Okay? So when you're filling in your diagrams, you do need to draw these arrows to show the direction of Earth's orbit around the sun. Okay? Now that I know which way Earth is going, it's going to make my life that much easier. Okay? So Earth is orbiting counterclockwise. I've got those arrows on there. And now I'm going to start color coding this. I'm going to start right here with the equator. I'm going to do that in pink, just like I have my key up here, up at the top, above the diagram. I'm going to use that key to help me fill this in. So I'm going to start with the equator. All right, so this line, this belt that divides the Earth in half, it divides it into the north and south. That is what we call the equator. All right, so I have color coded my equator. That's done. The next thing I'm going to do is Earth's axis, and I'm doing that in orange, just like it says in my key right here. Okay, so Earth's axis is this piece right here. That's what Earth spins on. It revolves around the sun. It rotates on its axis. Okay, so I'm going to color code Earth's axis on each one. And I know this looks like a fair amount of work, but I promise you it helps to look at it and see all of it at one glance, all right? All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to color code the northern and southern hemispheres. And up there on my key, it says the northern hemisphere is blue. And when we talk about north, we talk about the top part of things. So even though Earth's axis is tilted, we are still talking about the top part of the Earth when we talk about the northern part of the Earth, all right? Now, I'm going to color it in on each Earth. That way I don't get confused. That way I'm not stuck at what I'm looking at. All right? And then lastly, up here, the last thing on my key is the southern hemisphere. I'm going to color that in green just like it says on my key. All right, so the southern hemisphere is below the equator. When we talk about something being towards the south, it is farther down. It is below something else. So the southern hemisphere is the bottom half of the Earth. All right, so now that I've got it color-coded, we're going to talk about seasons, okay? We're going to talk about where they go and why they go in specific places, all right? So, the first thing I want to point out is that these Earths on the left and right hand side are going to be the easiest ones to label. See this one back here at the back, right here. That one is back behind the sun, and the one right here up at the front that is in front of the sun. So those are not tilted towards or away from the sun. These on the edges over here are tilted towards and away from the sun, okay? All right, so to make our life easier, and just because we are in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm going to start labeling the seasons in the Northern Hemisphere, and then we can go back and do the seasons for the Southern Hemisphere. All right, so me personally, I start with this Earth over here all the time, just because it's a habit. I think it makes things a little bit easier if you start with this Earth right here. Okay? All right, so we're doing the Northern Hemisphere seasons, and we're starting on this edge on the right-hand side. So the Northern Hemisphere right here, it is tilted towards the sun currently. So if it is tilted towards the sun, it's going to be the warmest season that we experience, and that is going to be summer. So that is summer in the Northern Hemisphere, okay? And that's just for the Northern Hemisphere, and we'll come back and do Southern Hemisphere in a second. All right, now that I've got one season labeled, I can use my prior knowledge and I can go ahead and label the rest of them, okay? So the season that comes after summer is fall. So that's fall in the Northern Hemisphere. And then when I come over here, the next season after fall I know is winter. And I also know that the Northern Hemisphere right here is tilted away from the sun, so they're getting that indirect sunlight, so it's going to be a lot colder, just like it is for us right now. So this is close to where we are in January right now. So this is the position the Earth would be in, okay? So as we go from winter into the next season is spring. All right, so I have completely labeled all the seasons for the Northern Hemisphere, okay? So just to say it again, because I know this is kind of confusing for a lot of people, we know this is summer because it's tilted towards the sun, and as we travel in our orbit, we get closer and closer, we get to fall, and then as we travel through the rest of our orbit, we get closer and closer to winter, and then as we travel in our orbit, we get closer and closer to spring, okay? So now, let's talk about the Southern Hemisphere. Some of you might know this, but most of you probably don't, but that's really great if you do. I'm just making sure we're all on the same page here. We do not have the same season as the people that are below the equator. All right? We always have opposite seasons. So in the Southern Hemisphere, right here on this Earth, okay, the one on the right hand side, this is going to be winter in the Southern Hemisphere. All right? I know that might be a little bit confusing, but remember we talked about how it's tilted towards the sun, it'll be really, really warm. If it's tilted away from the sun, it's going to be a lot colder. All right, so this is winter in the Southern Hemisphere. And we can do the same thing we did with the Northern Hemisphere. We know the season after winter is going to be spring. And the season after spring is going to be summer. We also know that this Southern Hemisphere on this side is tilted towards the sun. So they're getting that direct sunlight. So we know that's got to be summer in the Southern Hemisphere. All right. And then the season after summer is fall. All right. And that's how you fill in that diagram. Now, we are going to do the second diagram. We're going to color code it the exact same way. We're going to talk about it the exact same way. But I do want to remind you that a lot of this is about perspective. We are talking about a 3D concept here, okay? And I know it might be a lot that I'm talking, but I'm trying to make sure that you understand what I'm showing you, okay? All right, so I am going to go ahead, I'm going to color code this just like I did for the other diagram. So I'm going to start out, just because I have my orange pen, I'm going to start with Earth's axis. So I'm going to color Earth's axis orange. And I'm coloring all of them orange, that way I don't get confused and I don't get stuck and not understand what I'm looking at. All right. Oh, I almost forgot. The first thing I did on the other diagram is draw the arrows. So I'm going to go ahead and add those arrows really quickly. Now, the arrows stay the same way because no matter what you're looking at it, you're still seeing it orbit in counterclockwise direction. Okay? So Earth's orbit is still going to be counterclockwise around the sun no matter how you look at it. Okay? All right. If you don't believe me, you can take a clock and watch the second hand spin around. No matter what direction you look at it from, you're going to see it spin clockwise. Okay, because it's a clock, it goes clockwise. So it's going to be spinning the same direction no matter how you look at it. Same thing with Earth's orbit around the sun. It's going to be going the same direction no matter how you look at it, okay? All right, now I'm going to finish color coding. I'm going to do Earth's equator next. I had that in pink. All right, so I'm doing the equator on all of them. All right, now that I've got the equator, I'm going to do the northern hemisphere. All right, so I'm going to color in northern hemisphere. Northern hemisphere is still at the top because when we say north, we mean the top side of Earth. I'm coloring that in on every single Earth. All right, and then the southern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere is still the bottom half of the Earth. We talk about something being south, it's farther down to the bottom. It is below. So when it's the southern hemisphere, it is below the equator. All right. Now that I have color coded it, we are going to go through and label the seasons. Okay. All right, so we're starting with the northern hemisphere, same as we did before, and it's a lot easier, I promise you, to do one hemisphere at a time. Otherwise, you're going to end up confusing yourself, okay? And I still am going to start over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to start with the northern hemisphere just because that's where we live. Makes life a little bit easier. All right, so this top part of Earth over here on the right-hand side is tilted away from the sun, so it's going to be a lot colder right here. So if it is the coldest season, that is our winter. Now, if we know winter, we're going into the next season. The season after winter is spring. Spring goes into summer. All right, and we also know that the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, so they're getting more direct sunlight. It's going to be really hot. That is the summer season for the northern hemisphere. All right, and the season after summer is going to be fall. All right, now that we've got the northern hemisphere labeled, we are going to label the southern hemisphere, okay? The southern hemisphere, we're starting over here on the right-hand side still, the same place we started before. This southern hemisphere right here is going to be experiencing summer. It is tilted towards the sun, so they're getting more direct sun. It's going to be a lot warmer. So it is summer in the southern hemisphere. And our next season after summer is fall. And our season after fall is winter. And we also know that this southern hemisphere on this side is tilted away from the sun, so you're getting less direct sunlight. So it's going to be a lot colder in the southern hemisphere right here. So that is our winter season. And we know the season after winter is spring. All right. So now that we have labeled all of these, hopefully it's a little bit easier for you to understand what we're talking about. I am going to do another video for you. Instead of just giving you these flat diagrams, I am going to give you another video with a 3D diagram so that I can show you. But I do want you to be able to read this and understand it on paper as well, because most of the time when you see it, you are going to be looking at a flat piece of paper, okay? So that's just the nature of the way things are working right now. We are going to be looking at a lot of stuff that's digital, a lot of stuff that's flat, but I am going to do my best to give you 3D concepts and 3D things to look at to help you understand this a little bit better, okay? So these are your diagrams for seasons. I talked a little bit more about why we experience seasons. This should help you when you do your diagrams for class.